Good afternoon, and welcome to the Douglas County Racial and Ethnic Disparities, also known as RED Virtual Conference. My name is LaDonna Jones Dunlap, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Subcommittee. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special thank you to the Separate Juvenile Court of Douglas County, Nebraska, the Honorable Vernon Daniels, also CEO and President of the Urban League of Nebraska, Mr. Thomas Warren Sr., and Douglas County Commissioner Chris Rogers. These individuals continue to provide unwavering support for our RED efforts. An additional thank you to the Nebraska Juvenile Justice Association for their partnership in making this virtual platform possible. Before we move into housekeeping items, we would like to put up a survey to see who's in the room, who's joining us today, as we always appreciate you all for taking the time for joining us over the noon hour. A few housekeeping items. All participants have been placed on mute. If you have a question for our presenter, please enter it into the chat box. We will monitor questions as they come in and continue, and we'll answer as many as possible as time permits. For purposes of CEUs, if you are viewing this presentation in a room with others, please make sure to type your name and email address into the chat box to receive your certification. And certificates will be out later this week.
Bye.
As a reminder, at the end of this presentation during the closing remarks, we ask you complete a brief survey about the presentation. Your input is valuable to us, and we thank you in advance for completing it. Now I will turn it over to Rodney Evans to introduce our presenter.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rodney Evans. I'm also one of the co-chairs with the Racial and Ethnic Disparities, also a CEO with Mays Metro Area Youth Services. I have the distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce to you my friend, my brother from another mother, Mr. Patrick Taylor today. Just a little background, Mr. Taylor was born in Long Beach, California, but raised here in the Omaha area. He graduated from Creighton Prep High School and has a bachelor's in sports management with Wayne State College. Patrick is currently the co-founder and director of youth development services here at Metro Area Youth Services Mays. He is responsible for creating and implementing creative curriculum that makes Mays services unique. He was instrumental in creating the Mays Gardening Program, where kids learn how to plant and grow and harvest their own foods. He is also the head coach of the youth basketball team. He also started the Mays Amazing Beekeeping Program, where kids learn about the importance of bees and learning how to be a beekeeper. Patrick is also an advocate for at-risk youth and a very vocal partner in the community. He sits on several committees that are dedicated to reducing disparities, as well as coming up with alternatives to detention. This training session will attempt to explain how America has conditioned young youth of color and how conditioning adds to the disparate treatment of those youth. With that being said, I will turn it over to Mr. Patrick Taylor.
All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that, Rodney, my brother from another mother. I appreciate that introduction. Hi to everyone. Again, Patrick Taylor here, Director of Youth Development at Metro Area Youth Services. I spend a lot of time, speaking with my youth about why they are the way that they are. Most of the youth that I work with, again, we're talking about racial and ethnic disparities. Most of the youth that I work with have had some type of trauma, are going through legal actions right now, are involved in the juvenile justice system. And I'm trying to either help them get off probation or improve their life in some form or capacity. And a lot of times my conversations tend to include the conditioning or what brought that child to be in their current state. And a lot of it has to do with their history, which I'll get to in a minute. So again, what I'll be talking about is how understanding your condition your conditioning can improve your cultural competency and awareness. One thing that we all need to understand is that we are all conditioned negatively and positively. One example of conditioning would be, I know everyone's got it on them or close proximity right now. And if an alert goes off or the phone rings or whatever, you're going to be looking at that phone. You are conditioned, to look at that phone. Who's texting me? What app gave me that alert? Is it my Amazon app and I have an order coming? Is it my Instagram app and I'm trying to figure out who liked my next post? You're being conditioned, by your technology. So that's just one form of conditioning, and we'll get into other forms of conditioning. There are two clips, and bear with me as there we go. So I'm going to show two clips, and also I would like everybody to keep an open mind. A lot of what I'm going to be discussing is not necessarily data driven. It's more of a social conversation. It's socially driven, not that data is not important, but again, when it comes to your conditioning, it's more about your thoughts. How did you get taught that? Where did you get that information from? Why do you think that? Why do you operate that way? Why do you behave in that manner? So just real quick, we're going to play these quick clips, and I just want you to pay attention. And again, there may be some language. We're all adults here, so this is, again, keep an open mind. You're going to hear some tough language as we go along with these tough conversations. So I'll show you this first clip here.
You the other girl. You the mama. So, at least I'm a girl.
Right?
At least I'm a girl. And I'm daddy. I'm grown. I'm a daddy. I'm grown.
Stop hitting your chest. You're making a raise. You think you tough?
That's how you gonna do it. That's how you gonna do it.
Oh, shit. See?
Yeah. That's what you get, Tony. I was on top of you, so how you gonna tell?
Okay. So I don't know how everybody felt with that clip, but there were a few things that were concerning to me. I don't know if you also noticed this young man doesn't have a shirt on. He's already sagging. He's already pounding his chest in a very aggressive manner. And to me, the way he's behaving, that behavior, once that young man got into class, once that young man got into a car, once that young man was out in society and he was behaving that way, I believe that young man would be looked at as a thug or a black young man that probably is street involved or raised in the streets. Again, that may not be fair to say because he may not be raised that way, but other people would identify that behavior as such. Let me go to the next clip. All right, this one is a little bit more harsh.
You called me a nigger. Go ahead.
My kid.
Wow, this is amazing.
Do not talk to my kid.
Okay.
Hello?
She finally gets the children's father on the phone, and it just spirals from there.
Talk to this fucking nigger right now. I'm telling you, he's video recorded me. He scared the shit out of Anthony. Started in the car. He wanted to run his mouth talking about BB and a trashy mother. Fucking say
Really?
something to him
I said
now.
that.
He's got me on videotape, and I'm still flipping the fuck out.
You called me a nigger. Go ahead.
I called you a nigger. You're a nigger. Nasty fucking nigger.
But don't worry, she's got the cops on lock. According to her, she's got a special kind of relationship with the local police department of Cheektowaga.
I don't sue people.
Oh, he knows the cops? How many cops have I stripped for? You ain't getting fired, bitch.
Okay.
And then she says the man on the phone will kill him, in addition to more violence.
Tell him, dude. You will fucking kill him. Don't even fucking... I'm telling you right now.
That's very, very good.
I will fucking yank his ass out of the car.
At some point, she forgets.
Okay. So again, very, very disturbing behavior. All right, so those two clips, again, very disturbing, which would bring you to think, where did they learn these things from? Because that's your conditioning. And I included both of these clips because they involve children. And again, there's no data in the world that will prevent these kids from witnessing, again, what this mother was saying, which she was referring to this black man as a nasty effing N-word. And I believe later on in the clip, those children also referred to this man as an N-word, and she's not going to correct those young people. And then in the other clip, we saw another young man acting pretty aggressively, not being corrected, telling another young lady that I'm the daddy, you're the mama. So I was using those two examples, and they're extreme examples, but that there's conditioning that's going on right there. And your conditioning is simply what you have been taught. And before we get into further methods of conditioning, there are a couple definitions that I would like to go over here real quick. And just to, hit the elephant in the room, how did we get here? How did we get to that young black man acting the way that he was acting? And how do we get to this young white mother acting the way that she was acting? And the elephant in the room is racism, right? But let's talk about these definitions before we continue on conditioning. And the definition of conditioning simply is the process of training or accustoming a person or animal to behave in a certain way or to accept certain circumstances, which is your social conditioning, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're teaching somebody right or wrong. It could be something wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean right, but it's the process of training someone in a certain way to accept certain circumstances, right? Second term, social engineering, which is the use of centralized planning in an attempt to manage social change and regulate the future development and behavior of a society, right? So you would utilize conditioning to engineer the society in which one lives in. Not just society, that could go for your household, that could go for a social institution, that could go for, and all of those little things built up to what we call our society, right? Second part of that definition is the use of deception to manipulate individuals, into, and this is in the context of information security, which is very, very big right now, into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. So again, even while you're conditioning or utilizing conditioning to engineer your society, you can use deception and manipulate ways and to teach people what you want them to do, say, behave, whatever. An indoctrination, okay, which is the process of teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically, right? Meaning you're being taught something that you aren't supposed to challenge in a way. Again, one example is if that young lady that was screaming at that young man that he was a dirty effing N-word, that may have been something that she heard in her home. And if she was never told that was wrong, and she never challenged it that it was wrong, then she just went along with it, understanding that this is the way things are, right? Oops, sorry about that. All right. So we just talked about indoctrination. Again, the process of teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. All right. Next term, culture. Okay. Which is the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. Okay. Which includes our customs, arts, our social institutions, our achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social groups, So within our culture, it's customary for us to watch the Emmys. It's customary for us to watch the Grammys, which is, supposed to be, when it comes to movie, filmmaking, and music, those are the achievements of our nation, of our people. So those are just examples, of the culture here in America. Okay. I would also include language, which is sometimes kind of underrated. And we'll talk more about language as my presentation goes on, but language is a huge thing. You saw a young man tell another young lady, I'm the daddy, you the mama, and I'm the daddy, I'm grown. Well, who taught him that language? And he's not grown. He couldn't have been older than 4 or 5 years old, and he's already using the language that I'm the daddy and I'm grown, and he's pounding himself on the chest. Well, he had to see that somewhere. He didn't come up with that. Someone had to have conditioned him to think that way at such a very, very young age. Right? Clothing as well. I also would include, as far as your culture and your customs. If anyone works with children or works with teenagers in this day and age, Nike is like, the creme de la creme of shoes when it comes to kids. Jordan has not played since, I don't know, 2002 or whatever. And he has more Jordan shoes out than he did when he was playing, Gucci and Fendi, those are very popular clothes, whether you can afford it or not, you feel like Gucci and Fendi is the thing to wear, so you're conditioned to think that if I have Nikes on my feet, I'm going to be more accepted. I'm going to be more popular. I may have more friends, whatever. I may be in the it crowd. Okay. All right. So few other terms here. So we have white fragility, which is a discomfort and defensiveness on the part of a white person when confronted by information about racial inequality and injustice. I know, and again, we're all adults here. I'm not here to discuss political views or religious views or make anyone feel uncomfortable or anything. We're just talking facts, and we know sometimes having these tough conversations can make people uncomfortable, whether you are white or black. And I also would say there probably is some black fragility if we feel like we aren't being respected about our history, or people downplay slavery, or people downplay the civil rights movement. We probably are going to feel a certain way. And I can understand how, if a white person was taught that, white inventors invented everything, and that slavery really wasn't that bad, and you guys should pull yourself up by your bootstraps type thinking. There could be some white people that might feel discomfortable or defensive when talking about historical facts. White privilege. Let's move on to white privilege. White privilege is an inherent advantage possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. So I don't think anyone would disagree that, if you're born white in America, that you definitely are probably going to have more opportunity to succeed. So exercising white privilege is a bit easier, if you're born white in America. Which leads me to affluenza, which is a psychological malaise supposedly affecting wealthy young people, symptoms of which include a lack of motivation, feelings of guilt, and a sense of isolation. The only reason I included affluenza is because as I was talking, I was going to, just describe the difference, especially when it comes to being involved in the court system, how certain things in the court system, especially when it comes to white people, are revered or looked at differently. So for example, if a young white man was caught with a gun, or was caught joyriding or whatever, a lot of times they'll look at that white young man a little bit differently. Hey, he had a gun. Maybe he goes hunting. Maybe he goes hunting with his dad. Maybe that's why he has a gun. No, you're not supposed to be driving, but okay, dad, maybe let you take the Mercedes out, for a spin or whatever. We'll just, give you a warning and, don't be on the streets anymore, whatever, but if a young black man gets pulled over with a gun, he's probably going to be looked at more like a gangbanger, a thug. You were going to do something malicious with this gun. So now you're a threat to society, and we'll talk more about that, but there's absolutely evidence out there. You can go online and do your research, where people are using their affluenza to beat court cases. But it doesn't work the other way around. So brings me to the next slide. What is racism? Okay. The official definition is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. Okay. And simply put, racism is prejudice that can affect your life. So when you hear other Black people say, or any minorities say that, well, I can't be racist, I can be prejudiced, what they're meaning by that is that my prejudice won't affect your life. My prejudice won't stop you from getting a job. My prejudice won't have you unfairly get pulled over. My prejudice won't have you unfairly sent to jail or give you an unfair sentence. My prejudice won't affect your life in that manner. So that's the difference between prejudice and racism. Okay. But in all actuality, it is a made up social construct that scientifically does not actually exist. And it was made up to support white superiority among all other people, but no more so than the Blacks and the natives, which, again, these were terms that we have been conditioned to use, but in all actuality, there is no such thing as white or Black. The screen that you are seeing with these words on there is white and Black. I don't know of any white person that actually looks this white, right? I don't know of any Black person that actually looks as Black as these words on the screen. So we have been conditioned to utilize Black and white. If you go fill out a job application, or you're filling out the census, or you're filling out anything, what you see there is what we have been conditioned to think in those boxes as Caucasian, white, okay? African-American, Black. What's curious to me is that when you are talking about Latino or non-white or non-Hispanic, all of a sudden, color is not used. When you're talking about Asian or Pacific Islander, which, everybody should know that. Again, I'm just referring to a lot of the buckets that you see when you're filling out, again, a job application. What are you? What is your ethnicity? Those are the buckets that you fill out. But only only two groups are identified with a color. The rest of the groups are not identified with a color. They don't say yellow or red or anything like that. Only white and Black is identified as a color. So I just find that very interesting that we've been conditioned to use that language. All right. So the reason that racism exists, and I'll just take you through brief history, because your history is where your conditioning starts. So during the Spanish Inquisition, which was formally established in 1478, to ensure that those of Jewish ancestry were kept apart and out of mainstream society, although it mainly focused on Jews in the beginning. As the centuries went on, and included Christianized Muslims, Gypsies, Asians, Americans, and Africans, right? And when you're saying Americans, They're talking about the Native Americans, okay? This thinking, again, gave way to the ideology that gave way, and Christopher Columbus was just one of those sailing to find new trade routes, those sailing to find new amenities. They had to find a way to justify taking land and pillaging land. And the way to justify that was to make either Americans or Africans, wherever the sailor ended up, was to make those individuals look less than or treat them as animals, okay? And that ideology was constructed by scientists. One scientist that I name, and there's a lot of scientists, who created this pseudoscience, Darwinism, they all are in the same bucket. It's thanks to a man named Carlos Linnaeus, who is considered the father of modern taxonomy and wrote the first biology textbook. So he's considered the father of biology. And he classified not only animals, but he classified human beings as well. And that classification was outlined in his book, Systema Naturae, published in 1735, which was during the Spanish Inquisition. And the Spanish Inquisition was utilizing the science that these scientists were coming up with to further classify human beings, right? So just like the animal kingdom, they were classifying humans as well, all right? And not only did they classify humans by the color of their skin, they were also classifying humans by their behavior. So if you look at this chart here, it is some of the language that was used by these scientists, okay? The Native Americans were considered red, choleric, meaning hot-tempered, okay? It's describing their hair as straight black. They had gaping nostrils, beardless chin. They were unyielding, cheerful, free, not really living by a code, okay? They paint themselves in maze of red lines, and they're governed by customary, they're not governed by rights, which is what the Europeans considered, that they were governed by rights. They wore protected clothing. They weren't running around naked, right? They also were considered wise, considered to be of the light, considered to be the inventors, okay? They were strong, muscular, plenty of yellow hair, blue eyes. They considered the Asiatics to be sallow, melancholy, stiff, haughty, greedy, meaning, they had their nose in their air. They were stuck up. They were protected by loose garments, and they were governed by opinions. They felt like those from Africans were black, lazy, okay, phlegmatic, okay. This is what their hair looked like: many twisting braids, swollen lips, flat nose. Again, this is where some of these stereotypes come from for all people. These are where the stereotypes start, okay? This is 1700s, okay? We were sly. They considered Africans sly, sluggish, neglectful. I found this to be interesting. They anoint themselves with fat. If you know what fat is oils, okay? If you're from Africa and you're from the desert, it could probably get dry, okay? And if it's dry, if you have dark skin, it may be itchy. It may be what Black people like to call, we're conditioned to say, you're ashy, right? And so I found that interesting, that even way back then, they knew that Black people liked lotion, okay? And that's where that particular stereotype came from, okay? And they considered us to be governed by choice, all right? So again, just painting the history of where some of these stereotypes and where some of our conditioning came from. Okay. Biological determinism and physical traits like skin color are prominent aspects of race making, but they are not the only considerations. When determining a person's racial identity, a number of social and interpersonal factors also come into play. Even in an age of strict biological determinism, race was just as much a social performance as it was a physical marker. Walter Johnson, a historian and author of The Slave Trader, The White Slave, and the Politics of Racial Determination in the 1850s, notes that under slavery, U.S. American courts found themselves using personal history, reputation, behavior, and social role in addition to biology to determine if a person was Black and therefore a slave. Okay, this is part of all of our conditioning. Okay. Just another aspect of slavery, okay? Between 1776 and 1826, Thomas Jefferson kept between 165 and 225 slaves in his Virginia plantations, with about 3/5 of his human property at Monticello and 2/5 at Popular Forest, his estate in Bedford. Although Jefferson imagined himself to be a benevolent slaveholder, he would watch for the happiness of those who labor for mine. That was him being quoted. He still thought of enslaved people as his chattel. Okay, Jefferson profited not just from the tobacco, corn, and wheat that his slaves grew in the crop fields, but also from the value of their bodies, and particular their natural increase. As property, the enslaved men, women, and children who belonged to Jefferson could be leased, mortgaged, bought, sold, willed, and given away. As the case of Gil Gillette, which was a slave of Thomas Jefferson's, makes clear, every slave that Jefferson owned was subject to at least one of these features of the American slave market. And I also believe that at one point in time, while Thomas Jefferson was building Monticello, he needed more capital, and he was able to mortgage about 100 of his slaves in order to build the capital. Okay, so again, with this particular history, it makes sense that Black people were property and was an economic stronghold when it came to the American economy, right? And so even when the slaves were freed, Black people were still being looked at as a commodity, which that ideology is what gave way to the mass incarceration system, which we will get to a little bit more here later. Okay. Again, these are just more stereotypes. You have the Jezebel. Again, look, this is a caricature in the early 1900s. If you see here, this is the big butts that you see in our media today and all the music videos that all of our kids watch. And, you know, everybody wants to build a booty. And that came from, again, we're talking about our conditioning. We wouldn't have even thought about having Black or big butts had there not been some of these Black caricatures, which, you know, that was actually looked at as a negative, you know, way back then. And now it's looked at as a positive if you have a nice big butt. Okay. And that is also where some of our hypersexuality comes from, which, you know, I'll talk, you know, more about as the slideshow goes on. But that's definitely something that our young Black females are feeling in this day and age. You know, everybody is abreast to sexual trafficking, you know, is at all-time high right now. And young Black girls, and not just young Black girls, but young Black girls are definitely being, you know, there's predators out there looking for young Black girls to do sexual things with, and they're being traumatized. And it's a traumatizing thing that's going on in our community right now. But again, I'm just trying to paint, this is the historical history of where this conditioning comes from. You know, you got the Aunt Jemimas, those were the mammies, you know, that was the caricature of, you know, the Black mama who's taking care of the white kids. And, you know, you see Uncle Ben, you know, the passive gentleman, that is the butler, so to speak. These are the images that, where do you get the idea of Black people like to eat watermelon, so this is part of the conditioning of where you even get these stereotypes from. Okay. All right. So which brings me to, again, slavery supposedly was to end, but if slavery were to end, it's interesting that we still utilize the language that slavery is illegal, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Okay. Which has in recent news, and I commend Nebraska for doing this, there has been some states trying to change the language because they understand the cultural relevancy of eliminating that type of language from the 13th Amendment. Okay. But as we can see, as these clips will show, there's a difference in ideology. I'll just play the Nebraska clip first. And this is the Nebraska clip.
On Election Day in Nebraska, it was Amendment number 1 on the ballot, an issue many maybe didn't even know about.
I think it was forgotten about, but my thing is 100 years from now, when my great grandkids are looking back at the state of Nebraska and looking at me as a state senator, I don't want slavery to be a part of that conversation.
Last year, Senator Justin Wayne led the initiative in the Nebraska legislature to remove language from the Nebraska Constitution that allows the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as a criminal punishment.
And you're all done? Yep. All right.
Tuesday, the people voted, and 68% of Nebraskans voted to remove the language of slavery from the Constitution, but about 32% voted to keep the language. That's about 270,000 Nebraskans that did so. Now there's conversation if the language on the ballot might have played a part in those results.
People are reading it very quickly, and sometimes voting yes means no type of thing. And so maybe for some voters that was the case.
The ballots looked like this. Voters were voting for the language of slavery to be removed or against the language being removed, which voters could have confused as voting for keeping the language or against keeping the language. The Secretary of State wrote the wording of this ballot, and while some may have been confused, others were not and wanted to keep the language as is. In an opinion column for the North Platte Telegraph, Senator Mike Groen was against changing the wording, saying it opens the doors for criminals to not be punished, saying, quote, "The issue is not about the ownership of slaves, but instead concerns the rehabilitation and punishment of individuals who have committed crimes against society." Chair of the Nebraska Democratic Party, Jane Klebb, says it's more about the principle of slavery still being in the Nebraska Constitution in 2020.
That word obviously carries a lot of racial connotations and awful memories and stain on our state and national history, which is why Senator Wayne wanted it removed.
The amendment ultimately passed, and the wording
so that gives you an idea, and good job in Nebraska for getting that to pass, but it's still curious that 32%, still wanted that language to stay the same. And the other senator basically saying it opens the door for punishment or for inmates to feel like there is no punishment. I don't know why slavery needs to be the form of punishment. This is Tennessee.
Where actual slavery is still allowed. How y'all coloreds feel knowing Tennessee has not legally abolished slavery? Okay. The State House of Representatives is voting on the bill today. There's a queen named Ramush Akbari, I think is how you pronounce her name. If I pronounced your name wrong, I'm sorry. She is sponsoring the bill to prohibit slavery under all circumstances. How crazy is that in 2021 to even hear? Listen to her.
This does do something because there's a difference between the word working and slavery. I've worked I have never been a slave. That's a clear distinction. I'm proposing to close a loophole that has an exception for slavery for those who are duly convicted of a crime. And that's a strong message we can send as a state. What we are proposing is slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited. Those who are incarcerated can still have a job like in the kitchen or the library. I would really ask that we, as a Senate, as a body, close this loophole.
Ramoose, you shouldn't even have to ask. This shouldn't even be a thing in 2021, but it is. Why? Because this is America. AMERIKKKA. Okay, please let Remy Ma give Dr. Ben Carson and Republican Senators Brian Kelsey, Frank Nicely, Janice Bowling, and Joey Hensley the biggest hee-haw.
Hee-haw, hee-haw.
I think I passed that clip. So, so Tennessee did not have that law passed.
With actual slavery.
So again, just giving you the difference in ideology, even from state to state, and that is also conditioning. Okay, I think everybody should research this young lady here, Jane Elliott. She was the first to do the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, and this is a great example of conditioning. After the Martin Luther King assassination, what she did with her third grade class was separate kids out by their eye color. So where the blue-eyed kids were told that they were dumb and not as smart as the brown-eyed people, basically hoping that they learn the lesson of discrimination and racism. And there's some very interesting things that happened during this experiment is that some of the blue-eyed kids that had been great students all the way up until that point, when they started being treated differently and they were told they were less than and they told that they were stupid and not as smart as the brown-eyed kids, their achievement levels, their self-esteem levels all declined. Meanwhile, there were brown-eyed kids who weren't good students. And then when they were told that they were superior and that they were smart, they started performing better. But also what happened was that the brown-eyed kids started treating the blue-eyed kids as less than. So again, that all comes from a place of conditioning and what you have been taught and what you have been told. How are we conditioned? By your family, your peers, social media, movies, news. And I see the time here. I know those that want to have questions, I please want you to have questions. I'll try to get through these real quick. News, school, information and misinformation. We live in a day and age where sometimes you're going to have to do your research just to see if something is true and correct. Okay. This is showing you how much we use social media, and teens, and this is increasing every day, everyone, is that teens are being, they're being glued to their phones. You know, it's becoming a distraction in school. It's a distraction at home. These kids are being addicted to their phones. They're being conditioned by their phones. Their self-esteem is tied to these phones. So these phones are very important. And the reason it's a struggle for them is because, again, everyone knows that the child brain is different than an adult brain. Your brain doesn't fully develop until you are 25 years old. So here are the areas of your brain that are advocated. This is just showing you the areas of your brain. And when you're 5-year-old, preteen, teen brain, and 20-year-old brain, you can see the development, here. Nice little slide here, just showing at 5, you're mastering language. At 6, you're seeing and hearing. 9, learning to play a musical instrument, and things of those natures. You're not mastering vocabulary until you're 67 years of age, So again, when you have a young brain and you're being conditioned in certain ways, and you take these things as either truth or fact, and now you go out here and you operate in the world, and some of the myths and some of the biases that you've been taught, you feel like that's how you're supposed to behave, and that's how you're supposed to interact within your society. So, and I am being asked to go ahead and open it up for questioning right now. But I do hope those that have my PowerPoint go through the PowerPoint. I have references on the PowerPoint where you can do some of this research. And I would say one thing that you can take from this is, you know, in order to be culturally competent, you definitely have to go back into your history and see where, you know, some of these negative ideas and some of these negative thoughts came from, so you can move forward with a clear of understanding of why people behave in the manner that they do, negatively or positively, so we can enhance the positive conditioning, and then the negative conditioning, we can fix where we went wrong. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Okay, Patrick, we have a couple in there. The first one, and this is regarding the vote that you were talking about, the Nebraska vote. Yeah. How much do you think the language on the ballot impacted the vote? I do know a few people who called me upset that they were not sure how they voted after seeing this on television.
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't think it impacted it as much as people would like to believe. Right. I mean, so 32%, I believe in the clip, they said that's just over 200,000 individuals. And it's just kind of hard to believe that 200,000 individuals, you know, didn't understand exactly how it was worded. You know, in the clip of the Tennessee that I wasn't able to show, the reason that the senators voted down the language being changed in Tennessee, one politician mentioned that it was lawyer talk, and because he doesn't understand lawyer talk and because he doesn't understand the amendment, that he's just going to vote no, that the language stays the same, which that doesn't necessarily make sense. If you don't understand the language, first of all, maybe you shouldn't be a politician, because aren't you supposed to know the language of what these laws and amendments are supposed to say and mean, right? The other senator said that he was voting no for the language to be changed because he felt that in 1820, slavery was a false history, meaning slavery didn't exist in 1820, which is why history becomes increasingly important, because if someone is going to state something like that as fact, then we should be able to prove to them, like, no, there was slavery back in 1820, you know? So I do think it played a very small role. I just don't think it played a huge role in the outcome.
Okay. What do you want the viewers to change dealing with red issues?
So what I would want viewers to change is, first of all, how you communicate with people in general, and are you even trying to search for, first of all, common ground, and then second of all, are you trying to understand someone else's conditioning and why they may have thought that way? So I'll give an example, and I don't know how many people on this meeting right now work specifically with kids, but I'll use an example where I have kids, and again, this goes back to the trauma that these kids, go through. I have young kids who refer to each other as "that's my son" or "that's my dad," and they're referring to each other. And this is like a 13-year-old calling a 14-year-old my dad, and a 14-year-old calling a 13-year-old son. And what I have to do is I have to challenge their language. And I asked that 13-year-old or that 14-year-old, what do you mean? Why are you calling him son? He's your peer. He's not your son. You don't have anything to teach him. You learn from adults. You don't learn from your peers in that manner. So you have to challenge people's language and their ideology and what they think. in order to understand someone's conditioning. And really what that comes from, and, to go back to the conditioning, if a young person doesn't have a father figure, then they may be looking for that father figure in any male, whether the male is a kid or not. So again, understanding that the trauma of not having a father may have a young person look for a father figure in all the wrong places would help you have an understanding of why that young kid is either lashing out or looking for a father figure in all the wrong places. So that's what I would want people to take away, is that when you're talking to people who have gone through trauma, try to understand why they went through that trauma, and then help them understand their whole history on, how you don't perpetuate or repeat the cycle of the trauma. I hope that makes sense.
Those were the only two questions that we had, and we are within 5 minutes of the end. So,
okay.
Do you have any further comments, or if Rodney's ready to do his closing, we're good to go.
I'll definitely do the closing. Hey, I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to definitely thank Mr. Taylor for your insight and experience. As we come close here, there's going to be a 5-question survey that will pop up momentarily. Please take a minute to answer the questions on the survey. Your feedback will assist us to improve our RED efforts. What I have to say is, with today's climate and the racial divide around the nation, it's kind of at this time and at this moment that we not buckle to the injustices and unfair practices that plague our communities. Definitely want to, again, uplift everyone who was on here today. If you have not downloaded the NJJ app, definitely do so. It provides a wealth of information and gives you insight to more training opportunities coming forward. So, again, thank everyone for their time. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.